Ben Weider works out of the Montreal headquarters of the Weider Enterprise.
Well, I hope you solved that problem in Morocco because of the two federations, and they must understand that there could be only one.
Ben is the first, and so far only, president of the International Federation of Bodybuilders, an organization which sanctions almost every bodybuilding tournament in the world.
What I envisioned was to work, expand, and go as far as we can go. But I never envisioned that it would become that prominent all over the world. You go to Burma, you go to the Cook Islands, you go to Norfolk Island, tiny little island with 5,000 people. There's a bodybuilding movement there.
The bodybuilding movement has transformed the lives of these brothers with their grade school education. It made them millionaires, allowed them to travel the world and mingle with the powerful and successful. Their rags to riches story began in a now long-lost world of Montreal's Jewish ghetto.
You know, we lived in a community which was really like a shtetl. You know, when the Jews came from Poland and Russia and so forth, they settled in certain areas where they can communicate, you know, go to synagogues and have their kosher shop. So it's all one closed, more or less, community. And I was raised in that kind of an environment.
Growing up in Montreal's poorest Jewish area, Joe learned to speak Yiddish at home. He also learned to watch out for the gang of toughs who were always ready to pounce on the Jewish kids whenever they left their safe shtetl.
When I went to school, you know, we had to leave our area, go through another area that was not a nice area, and then go to our school. And sometimes the other kids would pick on us and want to start fights.
We were considered as Muzi Juif, dirty Jews, and if we'd walk down the street, people would call us names and we'd get into fights to defend ourselves. So it was tough, and it was even tougher for guys like Joe.
Joe was a scrawny kid, a classic 90-pound weakling, an easy target for bullies.
I was tired of being beaten up, and I looked through the magazine and was mesmerized by it because you had all these strong wrestlers and boxers and weightlifters telling you how to get strong, and it was just what I wanted. I took the magazines home and I read them and read them and reread them constantly. And therefore I decided I want to buy a barbell set. I'm going to save up money and buy a barbell set. But I couldn't find a barbell set in the city because practically nobody knew what a barbell was or a dumbbell in those days.
So I remember one day he came back and he brought this axle, you know, from a train and some wheels. I said, what are you going to do with that? He says, it's close as I can get to a barbell. I'm going to train with that.
But his mother was no supporter of his newfound passion.
Then he would train in the dining room with his barbells, but not when she was home. When she wasn't home. And that threat I held over his head. If he ever didn't do what I wanted him to do, I'm going to tell Mother that you trained in the dining room.
I remember one time when this big guy came up to me and he said to me, you shut your mouth. He said, or I'll wipe the floor with you and I'll smash you to bits and so forth. And he was twice as big as me. So I said, oh yeah? He says, you dare to, and I'll call my big brother Joe and he'll let you have it. The guy said, you'll call your big brother and your father and your uncle? He says, I'll wipe them all out.
So he brings him to the house. My brother brings the doorbell. He says, Joe, this guy thinks he can beat you up. Oh, geez. Another fight? So I said, I don't want to fight with anybody. Then he started calling me, I'm a coward, I'm this, I'm that. And then he began to insult, you know, being Jewish and so forth. I lost my temper at that time, and I hit him in the jaw, and he fainted. I thought I killed him. That was one of the worst experiences of my life. I didn't know what to do.
So the two of us ran away, and we were hiding for a full day before we came home and found out that, you know, he was okay after.
And my brother was great. He brought me guys to fight if I wanted to fight with anybody.
Joe's reputation grew as he kept winning local contests.
I got write-ups in the newspapers, and people from different parts of Canada began to write to me on how to train. And I couldn't answer them all. So I decided, well, maybe I should put out a magazine just for Canadians to tell them how to train, what to do, and so forth. So they would be able to I'd be able to supply them with some information.
One day, a 16-year-old Joe showed up at his home with a desk and filing cabinet. Without asking permission from his parents, he set up shop in the family living room. Joe was in the publishing business.
My mother didn't like the idea because she thought I was going to be a bum. She didn't think that could be successful. She says, look, you have $7, you just finished public school, you know, you're not that literate, you never use a typewriter, and you're going to compete with multimillionaires and putting out magazines? She says, it's not going to work. So she didn't want me to do it.
So you see, in a Jewish family, if you were going to be a doctor or a lawyer, that was just super. But you're going to take up weightlifting and bodybuilding and print a magazine, it was just unheard of. So she thought that Joe was nuts. She gave him a hard time.
His father, on the other hand, who was eking out a desperate living as a presser in a garment factory, was more supportive.
My father wouldn't take me to the factory no matter what. He says a factory worker in those days, he says, is a dead man. He could do nothing for himself but to be a slave. I'd rather Joe to do whatever he wants, whether he wins or loses. That's what I want him to do, to be free.
He rented a mimeograph machine. He bought paper, and we took turns mimeographing. And he stapled the pages and went to the American News. And he came in the front door, and they threw him out, and he came in the back door, and they threw him out. And finally, they said, we have to see this younger man. He's so insistent. And they saw him, and they took on the magazine.
After the teenager convinced the Montreal representative of the American News Company, then one of the largest magazine distributors in the world, to sell your physique, business took off. It wasn't long before circulation reached 50,000 copies a month. And even his mother had to admit that Joe just might be onto something. And when his younger brother Ben was about to be discharged from the Canadian Army, he knew Joe had a job waiting for him.
He needed Ben. He really did. He needed he was getting bigger. And the business was growing. And who can you trust if not your own brother?
While Joe handled the magazines, Ben took care of the mail-order equipment business. Ben also began to promote bodybuilding exhibitions in Montreal.
This is very interesting. Back in 1948, I did everything here. I made the sketch, the Maple Leaf. It's the Mr. Canada contest in 48, very, very first one at the Monument National Theatre. Imagine that. We charged $1.25 a ticket, and general balcony cost was only 75 cents.
Until the Weeders showed up, bodybuilding contests were more like carnival sideshows. The Weeders changed all that. But not everyone in bodybuilding was happy. The all-powerful sanctioning body, the American Athletic Union, decided these two upstart Canadians had to be stopped. Just before a major Weider competition, AAU representatives showed up, threatening to blackball anyone who participated.
I called over Joe, and Joe said, Ben, call the policeman. He said, well, kick those guys out. Called the cop, kicked them out, and then right there and then, Joe and I made a pact. From now on, we're going to control bodybuilding without the AAU.
They called their organization the International Federation of Bodybuilding. But it would take a young Austrian kid with an unpronounceable last name before they and their sport finally made it to an international stage.